by 2050, with the urban population more than doubling its current size, nearly 7 of 10 people in the world will live in cities.
I've kind of gone from very nature-rich environment to almost nature-poor environment. And I've started to notice how that affects my mental health.
You know, we take what we need from the land and then we don't really care what we leave behind. So how do we actually move and transition into this new type of relationship where we practice earth care?
Okay, so good morning Zairah and Lenka, and good morning everyone who is watching this video. I will do an introduction to what we are talking today, and then we will go into an interview with my two guests. This September, our next theme revolves around the topic of rewilding. The inspiration behind it originally is that I grew up in the countryside of France during my childhood, and I now live in a big city in London in the UK. The contrast is obviously big, but as a nature and wildlife lover, I am always more particularly attracted to the natural spaces and wildlife one can still find in the city. I also started working on an artistic project launching this month around foxes that are famously very numerous in London, and you can see them very easily at night here. And for me, they are one of these last wild but very adaptive animals you can actually still witness in the city. And this project made me reflect on how we actually invite or not nature and wildlife in the city, and therefore how we can become connected or totally disconnected from it. As the story goes, and looking at trends, regreening cities has also now become a major topic. We know that the world population will reach 8 billion people at some point in the next few years, and there is a debate as to when exactly that will be, but it will be soon. And by 2050, with the urban population more than doubling its current size, nearly 7 of 10 people in the world will live in cities, putting even more pressure on how we actually integrate nature as part of it. Now, with the knowledge and awareness that human activity is already the dominant impact on the environment, today architects, leaders, permaculture specialists, and many other people are putting plans into action to regreen and rewild our cities, rethinking and rescripting our relationship with nature and the environment at the same time. And this has only been accelerated by COVID since last year, which acted as a trigger to rekindle our relationship with nature as we were forced to pause, to slow down, and especially recognize both the impact we humans have on nature, but also, in turn, the impact nature actually has on us too, and how important and precious it is. So to speak about this topic, I have two very special guests today who are live from the UK and the Netherlands. And it will be an all-women conversation, so Wonder Woman today. Both of my guests, as it happens, are working on projects revolving around regreening the city, which is our theme for today in their respective countries. So let's do a short introduction. I don't know who wants to start. Zairah, perhaps would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Ingrid. I'm the founder of an organization called BlueO2. And essentially, we work on developing regenerative solutions with the aim of basically restoring the human-nature relationship. So I guess you could describe this as creating symbiotic relationships. As you might know, in nature, there are several sorts of relationships. You have a parasitical relationship, neutral, and also symbiotic. And unfortunately, in our human history, a lot of what we've been doing, especially in the past 100 years, could be described as parasitical. You know, we take what we need from the land, and then we don't really care what we leave behind.
Yeah.
I think this is really the essence of many of the problems that we are facing. So how do we actually move and transition into this new type of relationship where we practice earth care? Earth care is one of the principles in permaculture. I'm a permaculture practitioner. So we actually work on the nexus of earth care, people care, and future care. And I always like to put right in the middle self-care. So it's really all about caring, right? So how do you even begin to restore that relationship? I think this has been, for me, the quest with BlueO2, but also a lifelong quest. So unlike you, I grew up in the city, in a very urban area, but we had this communal garden in the back. And it was really, when you look at it, when I look at it with today's eyes, it was not so much, it was a piece of grass with some bushes on the sides. But basically, my mother had put a little ladder from the balcony so I could jump right into the garden. And I would be there studying the ants, studying the worms, playing in the mud, running around on bare feet. You know, I would always refuse to wear shoes or slippers. And for me, that's basically how I grew up. You know, that was my house. You know, I had a house, but I was barely ever there. So I grew up in that garden. And I feel that growing up in that way has really impacted me a lot, especially in a younger age, because when you are a child, you have a really small area that you call yours, basically. So this has really impacted my relationship. So I feel it's totally possible to give this to children in the direct vicinity of where they live. But I also see challenges, especially in some of the neighborhoods where we work. So this is really where I'm coming from. So to bring nature close to home.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Zairah. So over to you, Lenka.
Thank you. That's really hard to follow. I'm a bit like you, Ingrid. I grew up in a tiny little village in South Moravia in the Czech Republic. And it's only 3,500 people, so everyone knows everyone, and kind of everyone used to look out for everyone. And I grew up with a bunch of kids, and we would literally be the type of kids who would be pushed out in the morning and told not to come back unless it's mealtime. So we were this wild roaming kids, you know, terrorizing the fields and the parks, and not terrorizing, just building dens. And I had a really nice childhood. I also had a grandma who was very connected. She came from a family of farmers and winemakers. So she was very connected, and I think she connected with herbs. So she was trying to teach me, not that much of it stayed, some of it did though. So I think I had a very free-ranging, natural childhood. However, I also knew that I'm going to leave as soon as humanly possible, because this is the problem with small cities. It's really nice as a childhood. As a teenager, you're like, oh my God, this is so boring.
Yeah, it was the same.
So at 18, I left, and I've lived in London, and I've lived in New York. So I've kind of gone from very nature-rich environment to almost nature-poor environment. And I started to notice how that affects my mental health.
Yeah.
And what I found out is that the nature-poor environment, without knowing cumulatively, had a really massive impact on me. And I didn't kind of trigger and twig until couple of months or 3 or 6 months, I felt really depleted. And it was beyond I started a new job in a new country. I went to this park and had a kip. I had a sleep for 3 or 4 hours, and I woke up and felt really refreshed, more refreshed than I've had for months.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a really visceral experience of kind of how nature is good for our mental health and how it also heals us. So I think from then on, I started exploring the topics, and at the time I was doing a lot of photography. So I've started photographing urban nature within the urban context. So there's kind of the artistic side as well, because you start to look out for these little nuggets nature, and it could be a moss on a wall, or it could be grass, and how it's lit by street lamp.
To me, yes.
Yeah. So I think, and growing up, I also had, because I had such a nice nature rich experience, it kind of made me realize that the way we live is not very sustainable. So I studied sustainable development and geography, and focused on climate change and how do we tackle it from a legal, human rights and development perspective. It's kind of trying to feel out, take a more systemic view of where is the disconnect between the way we live and how we view nature, and how we kind of use and almost abuse nature, and probably not maliciously, but I think it kind of comes back to the way we've been brought up.
About the consequences.
Yes,
right.
Yes, exactly. I think we kind of have been brought up with this: we are the apex, we are the masters of the earth, rather than, well, as a master, you also don't only have rights, you also have the responsibilities. So we're not masters, we are the custodians of the earth.
Yeah, and you use that word to describe also yourself and what you do, right?
Yes, yes, definitely. And I think it's just a call to everyone to question what their own attitude and what their own view is. Do you see yourself as a master, or do you see yourself as a custodian? And then if you see yourself as a custodian, what kind of things our ancestors did that are more in life and more in a really good relationship with life? Yeah. What am I doing, and what do I care enough to change? Or what my life for the kids will be. And it doesn't have to be kids of humankind, it can be also kids of all kind.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that's
empathy with nature, and we're looking at our relationship with nature. And if you have that empathy, if you develop it, then you change your relationship to how you interact with nature, right?
Yes, and I think it also kind of impacts on how you see yourself versus nature, that we're not separate, we are part of. And then if we abuse nature, we are also abusing ourselves in some way, right?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, both. I think you are both very inspiring human beings, and I'm just so glad to have you here to discuss this topic. So we are going to move to the questions of the interview, and it's a short format of 5 questions, but I think that will allow us to cover quite a lot together. So if you are both happy, I will start with the first question, which is a big one. So, as I said, you are both leading projects aiming to regreen the city, or a plot in the city, because you need to start somewhere, obviously. And you are also both at the early stages of the project, even if you've already done substantial work around it, and to also plan your vision for it. So what I would like to do to start with is if you could please introduce for us your respective projects, and also tell us what your vision is with it. So who would like to start?
I'm happy to kick off.
Okay.
So the project I'm starting is actually in my own city. It's in The Hague. It's about 10 minutes by bike from my house. And it's a project called the Future Garden. And where we basically came from is we had this idea to start a garden, and it was a very kind of rundown area, and it was really depressive to look at. So actually a few people at the same time had this idea of, could we maybe start something beautiful there and create a green space. So so I ran into these people via I guess my permaculture network, and we started discussing. And it's taken us quite some time. Sometimes this process of creating projects is also a process of emergence. You know, it's not something that we automatically have this picture, oh, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to have a strategy, and we're going to follow step-by-step process. You know, this is how businesses work, how corporates work. But when you're doing something organic, you also have to allow it to grow organically. I think that may be one of the challenges that we face. So as we started working on this project, we ran into challenges. You know, we wanted to create some edible plants, and we actually already planted some trees and some seed. And in the beginning, I was really involved in a very kind of marginal way because I was busy doing some projects that were at a more conceptual level. You could say I was doing bigger projects, but actually my own development, I got pulled into this project more and more. So we started discussing actually our challenges and why things weren't working. And we had a very bad drought in the past 2 years, very early spring droughts, which is very exceptional for our region. So we saw that the trees that we planted were suffering a lot, and we had talked with the municipality, and they were planning to put like a water point there, but the water point was being delayed. You know, bureaucratic processes take a very long time. Everybody was getting frustrated. And I guess at a certain point we had this aha moment. You know, we were sitting at this bench outside of the garden, and it's like, you know what, I'm wondering, why do we need a tap in the first place? You know, it's kind of counterintuitive to have a tap there to water the plant when the plants are actually catching the water themselves. So this drought that we're facing, and also the wetness, the rain, those are exactly the problems that we face with the world. You know, this is climate change. This is climate change. Looking at these 300 square meters, we are looking at climate change right here and now.
Yeah,
so what can we do about
it? Right, yeah.
Exactly. And this is a neighborhood, you know, the income is relatively low. It's very gray. It's got a lot of problems. Somehow these things always seem to collide, you know, and my answer is regeneration. You know, regeneration for me is something that takes place at so many different levels at the same time. So we spoke to each other, and one of the people living in the street next to it, she said, you know how we're always kind of last in line with all sorts of developments. And wouldn't it be great to have something that we can actually be proud of, so that we can set an example? And then we actually started thinking, like, how can we make this garden an example of climate adaptation in the city? You know, and that's how we came up with this working title, The Future Garden. And you know, as we started working on this, it started growing, the idea, and it became much more also about empowerment, you know, about taking this piece of your city and then changing it. And for me, it was also such a learning experience, because I've studied permaculture. I know it's about starting close to home. I know it's about slow and small solutions, but we've been conditioned for so long to think big, you know, to scale, to be ambitious, you know, that even though I knew
at the same time, sorry to interrupt, at the same time, you know, we see all of these climate crisis issues that are global. I was actually reading the post of someone yesterday saying, what can we do? And it's hard. And we had the discussion with Lenka as well. It's like, we know we need to address the problem globally, but it's also about local action, right?
Yeah. And this is exactly, I mean, some people call it reframing. In permaculture, we say the solution is the problem. You know, a lot of the time we look at our population and we think, oh, 6 billion people, what a problem is. But potentially these are 6 billion regenerative practitioners, right? So if everybody does something close to home, this is an amazing energy that we can mobilize, right? So I've spent my whole life trying to figure out this issue of climate change. I started really small thinking about this. And eventually I came to this conclusion, like, it might be very hard for a single person to change the world. And God knows I've tried, but it is completely possible for a person to change their world. And by changing your world, you wind up changing that bigger picture just a little bit, you know? So actually taking something that is run down and then regenerating it into something beautiful not only does something for the community, but it does something for yourself. It does something for climate change. You know, it has so many add-on effects.
Absolutely. And then there is also this idea, you know, that even if you're just one person, with the online world, social media now, you do influence people. It's like a network of people, you know, who are connected, and you never know if what you do is going to influence and impact someone somewhere else. And then this is also how it goes, right?
Yes, and that is one of the roles I also see for myself and for BlueO2. So many of these people that live in this neighborhood are not so globally connected. You know, we're talking about school kids, we're talking about the elderly, we're talking about economically marginalized people that might not even have a job, let alone a LinkedIn profile, right? So they're not globally connected, but they're locally connected, right? But at the same time, there's this world of knowledge. So I find myself kind of hovering in between, you know? So I can take whatever knowledge and resources are out there and I can bring them to the local level. But in the end, it's really about, you know, bringing that kind of change to a very grounded situation, you know, where you can actually show school kids there is something you can do about climate change. You know, and lately I had a class of preschoolers, 12-year-olds with me, and I was going through the garden with them and teaching them basically how do you observe, which is the first step in any kind of design. And we were having a lot of fun, and casually we also talked a little bit about climate change. And I always like to use the pizza analog. You know, when you see a pizza, can you swallow it in one go? Is that difficult? It's very difficult. I don't know if you tried it, but you cannot swallow pizza in one go, right? But you can cut a slice of it and take a bite. That's fairly easy, right? So essentially that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
I like the pizza. I like the pizza analogy because normally you hear this, you don't eat an elephant in one go. And you just think, why would you want to eat elephant?
Pizza makes more sense, right?
Oh, that's brilliant, Zairah. So let's move to you, Lenka. You've got a beautiful project that you are working on with other people, which is called the Golden Leaf of London. So could you tell us about it?
Yes, of course. So one of the topics I've been exploring is regenerative finance. And through that, I came across Elizabeth Marsh, who came up with the idea. And I think came out of lockdown, which is probably when a lot of people kind of reevaluated their relationship with nature. And she was walking to her local park and she got fed up with it and then started walking somewhere else. And she just thought, why am I spending time walking to parks or green spaces? Why aren't our streets green spaces, right? And I think it kind of, the idea grew from there. Why can't we connect our streets? Can't we plant them almost like a living art project, convert them into ribbons of vegetation? And I just thought it was such a beautiful idea, and it's some things just connect with you on a heart level, and you just think, because then it sparks the creativity and the imagination, and kind of my climate background and starts thinking as well, well, it's not just living art project and it's not just beautiful, it's also, as you said, Zairah, it's also very incredibly practical, right? Because then you're dealing with adaptation to climate change, then you're dealing with, if the cities gets too hot, you can actually mitigate the urban heat effect, which I think not a lot of people knew about until we had the heat dome over Vancouver, the kind of the northeast Canada and America.
Absolutely.
And now the data is coming out, like if you have a tree, that those trees can make up to 10, 12 degrees centigrade difference between a street that hasn't got trees on and a street that does have, right? Yeah. And that kind of brings up also the issue of social justice, and I think you touched upon it, right? I think a lot of the wealthier areas, when you really look at them and start analyzing them, what makes them feel different is the presence of nature.
Yeah.
And all those poor areas don't have it. And therefore, they're going to be hit so much harder by heat, by drought, let alone kind of the mental and physical well-being that is associated with being close to nature and being connected to it.
Yeah.
So it's not just
point, Lenka, because today when we are talking of a climate crisis, we already know that the people who contribute to it the most are perhaps the least affected today, even if that might change. But what you're saying is in a city, you actually find the same type of differences, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, and add to that problem that in these neighborhoods, there are a lot more people living on less space also. So you have more inhabitants per square meter and less nature per square meter on top. So it's actually like an exponential difference.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really good. Okay, there is actually a really nice simulation on the website, the Golden Leaf of London, Lenka, that shows like almost like famous spots in London, and with a simulation before and after what it can look like with a lot of nature and redesign it. It's absolutely beautiful. I will put a link to the website when I put the video on YouTube so that people can go there and have a look.
Yes, and I think it's nice to also observe your own embodied reaction to it. You just think, which one makes me feel more kind of joyful and relaxed? That one or that one?
Absolutely.
And it's just, you know, and you kind of think it's just pictures.
Yeah,
but even these pictures have power to change.
Absolutely, and the ones with a lot of nature, as you said, immediately take a lot of joy when you look at it. It's actually amazing. Mm. So I think you might have started to answer the second question. So let me know if you have anything more to add to this. The second question is what were the inspiration and the triggers behind the creation of your project? So Lenka, you were talking very much of COVID, obviously, and how people connected more with nature, right, at that time. So that was really the main trigger for you.
I think, well, that was the trigger for Liz. For me, it kind of goes deeper, kind of more backwards. And I think what really connected it for me as well is that one of the other co-founders, so there's 3 co-founders at the moment, is Joe McDonald. And he was there at the beginning of Highline, and he helped to create Highline. And that's almost like a blueprint for, you know, local action everywhere, because you just do it, and it's incredibly fascinating to hear him talking about it and how they've done it, because they kind of went in a way the same way you going, Zairah, is bit by bit. They portioned a small section, and then they approached everyone in the community and say, well, do you want to co-create this? And did design competitions. How would you do it? So it's not just a group of people imposing something, it's inviting the community to come and participate and think that they have the power to change things, right? And I think that's the beauty. And I love what you said earlier about your project being an organic one, and because I think our project is very organic as well.
Yeah,
and that's the beauty to people come in.
That sense of ownership, I suppose, as it goes, because you want them to be active participants, right?
Yes, and everyone contributes something different, and that's the beauty. So you kind of, it's almost like a living lab of cross-pollination of ideas. You might not always implement them. That's another thing, right?
You know, there is always a bit of that in any project.
Yeah. But I think at least it's an open conversation of how can we live in cities and co-design them, rather than the design being imposed upon us and we just live with it.
Yeah, because very much, I mean, I'm not a specialist of the topic, but obviously when you think of city architecture, it's more about the buildings. But now things are evolving about landscaping and etc., which is as important as we know. So Zairah, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah.
I'm sure you
Of course.
please.
Yeah, no, I was triggered by what Lenka said with the living lab, because that's actually our approach as well. We actually say that we are a living lab because, I mean, since I started BlueO2 5 years ago, it's just been one learning journey, basically. So, and I think the learning is actually, in the end, is the goal, right? So I want to open that opportunity for everybody to learn. And if you come with these ready-made solutions, you know, there's no learning in it. So it's really about participating and then trying to solve these problems together. And it was only a few weeks ago that we did a co-creation session, and we took on some of the problems in the neighborhood that were maybe even beyond the garden. You know, we talked about vandalism. We talked about, you know, youth not having a purpose and causing trouble. And of course, we see this in the garden. We see the garbage in the garden. We clean it up, but you know, it's about really taking that broader perspective. And then we talked about how can we reframe this? How can we go from problem to solutions? And I think this is really the empowering process, right? Because so often we see these problems and we think somebody else should solve it. You know, the municipality, and actually the municipality was also there, so we were all together, right? So there was not this top down, bottom up divide, but it was basically about creating that level playing field between school children, people working for the municipality, people living in the neighborhood, teachers, you know, really everybody brings in their perspective. And then when you create this level playing field, you find out, yeah, we all have a little piece of the puzzle, right? It's really about making that puzzle, and it's about really creating those relationships so that the pieces can come together, right? So that in the end they connect, because so often, you know, you have this urban design solution, as you say, you know, it's architects, it's a project developer, but it doesn't really connect with the needs of the people. So it's kind of like the middle ground is missing. So yeah, green space, turns out, is a great way to kind of bring those levels together, especially these green spaces that nobody really seems to care about. It's like, you know, it's like no man's land. It's fantastic for creativity, you know?
Yeah, and I think you said something actually that I really like, because when you replant an area, for example, this is not where it stops, is what does it become after? How do people look after it? How is it being respected or looked after? It just doesn't stop at, okay, I've done my job, I've replanted the area, right?
Yeah, and then the nice thing about the green spaces is that, you know, when you talk about buildings, there's a lot of money involved, the stakes are very high, politics enter the scene. The nice thing is about green spaces, which is also the less nice thing, is nobody really cares. Yeah. And this sounds bad, but actually everything is about reframing, right? So the fact that nobody cares means everything is possible, right? You can start from scratch.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's something I actually feel quite strongly about, because where I live in London, we have a big park in Clapham. And after every day or every weekend, especially if the sun is out and everybody's in the park, systematically at the end of the day, you've got trash everywhere. I'm like, why is this happening every single time, you know? So let's move to the third question, because I'm also...
But maybe I can add something to that, Ingrid, because when we think about nature experience in the city, we often think about these big parks. And this is also where the problems of waste and such collide, because nobody really owns the big park. Yeah. I'm also talking about the little green spaces that line the sidewalk, or the part in between the roads, you know, where you just have some trees and some grass, you know, all these kind of what we call underutilized spaces. This is really, when I see all those spaces, I get really excited, because I'm like, there's still so much that we can use, right? Free space in a way.
Yeah, and that's very much part of your project, Lenka, I think, right?
Well, I think it's kind of it's everything. I think, to me, the project is all about triggering the imagination, and I think you said it. It's these little. How do we rethink the spaces that we live in? And what I'm really excited about is kind of the movement towards biophilic streets and cities, because as you said, in permaculture, you know, how do you look at a problem and turn it into a solution? And when you, for example, look at climate change, it's going to be a lot warmer, not uniformly across the world, of course. But so how do we utilize, for example, our buildings not to be warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer? Well, it's with the help of plants, yeah, and different materials. So you almost kind of go from like up to the 20th century thinking. We have had the urban design that has been designed for the ease of speed, the logistics, the trade. We are in the 21st century, so now we need to start thinking, well, how do we actually design for people?
Yes.
Right. And I think this is where you kind of almost start to marry the old thinking with the new things, so the buildings and the infrastructure and the logistics, with the new thinking of we are part of nature, we actually love nature, we really need it, we miss it, let's bring it back. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of creates a different relationship as well. Although I am interested in how you would, what conclusions you reached regarding the vandalism bit, because I think that this is, we also have to start thinking about kind of the harder. Yeah.
So that's very handy, because that's part of my third question to you two. So how are you designing the project, and what challenges, but also what opportunities are you facing with it then? That would be really interesting to hear from you on this.
Yeah, I think the vandalism is definitely a huge challenge, and I think really as a first step, it kind of helps to try to understand where it's coming from. And I think we said before, we are nature, we are one with our surroundings, and then when I see some of these surroundings, how untaken care of they are, how barren and gray they are, it's kind of, it reflects also how sometimes we feel on the inside, so this careless surroundings also reflect this not really caring about ourselves in a way, and it goes both ways, so often in these neighborhoods there are problems beyond many different problems collide, like economic opportunities, all of that, and it's not so easy growing up in a neighborhood and staying positive, right? Especially when you're constantly confronted with the surroundings that's not really positive, right? So it's trying to understand really where it's coming from. And on the other hand, then also engaging these kids in a way that gives them a positive sense, right? So I guess that's really where we try to turn it around, and we're learning, we're just at the early stages of our project. So one of the activities we have lined up for next September is we're going to do a waste procession together with a community organization. We're going to invite a lot of youths and kids to gather all the waste in the area that we're working in. There's a playground and there's the garden that we're creating, and we're going to invite them to make a piece of art. And then we're going to take that piece of art with a procession, like kind of you have in the southern countries, you have a procession with a Catholic image and lots of people, like, we make it a festivity. So we ritually take our waste and we carry it through the neighborhood with a drum band and stuff, show our waste, but to turn it into something beautiful, a piece of art. And
this is when, it makes you look at it in a different way, isn't it?
It's a first step in a process, and I think if a lot of kids and youth contribute to this cleaning up, like once you see how beautiful it is without all this rubbish, then you think twice about just dumping your soda can somewhere. So I think it's a process, and we have to learn along the way and learn from the reactions and see what else we can do.
Okay, perfect. So Lenka, because I did speak to you, and that's something I'm actually really interested in, about the design of replanting. You're looking at specific type of trees or plants, And you were telling me also that in London, because London is kind of divided into different villages, you were telling me actually sometimes they are not the same depending on where you are, or you are told it's not exactly the same. So could you tell us a bit about the design and then the type of plants you're looking at?
Sure. So I think London is basically designed into like 32 boroughs plus City of London. So they, you know, it's an interesting, and I think that I'm learning. We're all learning on the go, and it's a continuous process of learning. So we didn't know this, but each borough might have a different list of accepted plants on, you know, what you can use and what you can't use, which makes it a little bit challenging. It's almost like you have to do a comparative study of what's on your list, but that's not on yours. And it's almost like, okay, there is the list, and that the list is there obviously for a reason, but can we unify? Can we unite not just with nature, but also amongst London and Londoners and the communities, and develop a topic which is basically, if that plant is not on the list, can it be put on? Can we have a conversation? What's behind the reasoning? What's behind the thinking? Why is it this rigid?
Who are the people who make these lists? Do you know?
I think probably the local planners.
Okay.
So I suppose, and I think this is the new world, right? We've all kind of been living in this. I hate this word, but it's kind of used a lot. Silos, in this compartmentalized groups. And I think in order to tackle the current problems, we have to break out of the groups and start talking and start collaborating in a different way, and start incorporating, start the conversation of like, I am the expert, you are the expert, and you have a lay person who's coming in, and you have someone who's amateur but lifelong enthusiast. And how do we kind of co-create this conversation and this space that we start marrying up the ideas and just creating something different, not I am the expert, I'm going to tell you what to do, which has also kind of created a backlash of, I mean, especially in the UK, don't trust the experts, don't trust the scientists, because they live in this bubble. Yeah. Because in some ways they do, right? Yes. But we do as well. So it's about creating a space where we can all have a conversation and create something together.
Absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. So moving to the next question, which is also really interesting. So what social impact, I know we touched base on this earlier, but what social impact would you like to have with your project? What benefits do you think people will be able to get from it or would get from it? I think Zairah, in particular, you have quite a few objectives around this with your project, right?
Yeah, so there's the objectives that we formulated, and then there's the objectives that kind of move beyond that, right? So you have direct and indirect. So our direct impact is basically on what we talked a little bit already about. You know, you have these urban heat islands, but at the same time we have increasing problems with water management. So we are actually in the garden creating a wadi, which is basically a temporary pond. It's a way to infiltrate rainwater, and we're using the roof water from an adjacent building. So the building that the garden is next to has a roof area of about 600 square meters, and we're using our 300 square meters garden to actually infiltrate all of that water. And what that does, it replenishes the groundwater. Groundwater is extremely important, very underestimated generally. We're in a coastal area, which means that if the groundwater is going down, the soil levels are also moving down, which is a problem also for real estate owners. It damages the building, but also in terms of climate change, the groundwater is going down, the soil is sinking, seawater levels are rising. You know, this is a problem also for our underground drinking water reserves. So groundwater is very important. So we practice rainwater harvesting for that reason, but also because it provides direct cooling. So, and we use the plants basically as a big sponge. So when there's a dry area, the idea is that we don't need to water, but the plants actually act as a pump. You know, we will plant willows. Willows are extremely sturdy plants, but they also have long roots that retain a lot of water, so they can bring the water from the deeper levels when there's a dry spell going on. So restore this hydrology. And then together with restoring the hydrology, we also enhance the soil health. We increase the biodiversity both below ground and above ground. And of course, we create this natural experience also. So possibilities for exploration. So that's actually a much more long-term effect, you know, that we do something with the mindset, which goes maybe beyond the direct measurements of what we can do, but we will also invite the school children to help us actually measure the biodiversity, like to measure the butterflies, the bees, the insect population in general, and by involving them in this work, also open their eyes to what is possible and how we should value these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I think touching on what Lenka said about the lists, fortunately, we don't have any lists here to work with, but we do work with the people in Regreening of the council. And I think what we bring beyond the direct impact is also our way of working organically, of growing these projects. Of course, I understand where these lists come from. You know, there's this need for control. You know, you have a large urban population, so you want plants that you can control, right? That are, you know, that's a trend I see generally in the urban green. And what we create, it might look a little bit chaotic, but it's so much more interesting in the long run. You know? So I think it's always something we're changing in the mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is design, but also letting nature flourish as well, rather than being too much in control at the same time. It's a balance, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a balance. Yeah, but it's okay to stretch the balance in the other direction from time to time, right?
Yeah. So what about you, Lenka, in terms of social impacts and how people benefit from it?
I think Zairah, I think there are so many kind of areas which are so similar, right? I mean, because we in our design we have to think about that as well. But in terms of social impact, I think it's creating streets that are more beautiful for everyone, and I think beauty is such an underestimated quantity, and yet it's so essential for us on a deep down heart-based level. So something that is beautiful, but something that is beautiful can also be very practical and pragmatic, right? And I think we've touched upon it, the whole urban heat effect, keeping water in the ground.
Yeah.
The mental and physical well-being aspects. Kind of the social, the resilience and equity aspect. And I think more to the point, I think it's just opening up a conversation of where we are at in the world, and that I'm not sure about you, but I feel a need to change, and I feel we all want the world to be more beautiful and better, both for us, but also for future generations. So there is also the intergenerational aspect of what are we giving to our kids, and what are we giving to nature and biodiversity and life.
I think resilience, and resilience is definitely a key word that you mentioned, and it stands in opposition of this control, right? Because the control is something short term, but it's also a little bit of an illusion in the face of climate change and all the challenges ahead, right? So resilience and building that resilience also in future generations, I think that's what typifies our work.
Yeah, and diversity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is such a massive topic, because at the end of the day, if we are just this monocultures die. Any shock basically can wipe you out. Whereas if you're diverse and not just in groups, but also languages and cultures and the ways of viewing the world. Because we all have our blind spots. So it's all about being in a community and saying, well, are you aware that you haven't thought about this? And you're like, oh, I haven't had that experience. I'm not aware. Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's diversity, resilience, adaptation, beauty, equity, all that.
For me, I'm actually gonna tell you an anecdote that happened to me. But for me, there is also very simply this connection or reconnection with nature that perhaps some people I've never had. If they grew up in the city, I've always been in the city. Obviously, in London, we are lucky, there are lots of parks. But I remember a few years ago, I actually had a PR event with a bunch of journalists. And we did a trip to Norfolk, so which is a bit more north in the UK. And we went to visit a famous chef, Tommy Banks, who has a Michelin star restaurant there. And it's all very much about nature. He's a farmer. He's got beautiful pine coves where he lives, and he took us on a walk there and, looking at the nature around and how he uses it in his cooking. And when we came back from the event, one of the journalists who has spent all her life in London told me, Ingrid, I'm just so happy of this trip because I've actually never gone out of London. I'm totally disconnected from nature. And for me, it's just, I just forget that, it can happen like this for some people because obviously I grew up in the countryside, but it's not the case for everybody. And I think there is this big topic about we've lost our connection to nature, and that can be very real for some people in their everyday life, right? And this is why the project you are both working on for me is also so important.
Yeah, no, I mean, let me give you a very tangible example. I was telling you about this workshop that I did with the 12-year-olds. We were looking at the garden, and we still have to start basically the execution part of it. So it's right now full of what people call weeds, it's just random things that came up, which is very interesting to study also to see what comes up naturally. And I asked the kids, what they thought about it and their expectation. And in the beginning, when we started, they said, yeah, it's very messy. This is unacceptable. We must change this, which was also really nice to see their passion. But then when I went with them through the steps of what observation is, and I invited them to observe not only as humans, but also as butterflies or bees, they were free to choose an animal of their choice. One boy even chose a giraffe. But they observed as the animals, and they started to see, oh, there's enough food for the bees and there's places to hide. And they started to see the garden already different. And we didn't even do anything that day. And it was so much fun because the teacher started with, I want you to do something concrete with the kids. And I was like, what do you have in mind? Well, maybe plant something. I said, yes, but before we plant, we observe, So even all the layers, the teacher, they wanted to go straight to work. The kids wanted to go straight to work, and just taking them a step back and observe was so empowering in itself.
That reminds me biology classes when I was, at school, that you take a sample in the forest and you look what's in the sample and you see all this life in it, and it's just magical, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. And did you know that what you see in the soil is actually the same that we have in our gut, which is another story you could talk about for 1 hour. That the same bacteria live in the soil. They help us digest our food, isn't it? That's pure symbiosis.
Absolutely. That's really powerful, actually. So last question for you. I think we're just on time, which is great. So that's a little bit like local versus global and what we were saying at the beginning. So I wanted to ask you if you have a vision. Obviously, you're working on this project. You still have a long way to go to work on it. And as you both said, it's very much organic. But do you have in mind to then perhaps collaborate with other cities or countries, or perhaps use what you are doing, as a model that perhaps other people could use for themselves where they are? Because obviously it's all about inspiring each other, and this is also why we are having the call today.
Yeah. Well, I would love to work more with Lenka and the Golden Leaf Foundation. I think we have still many more fruitful conversations to go. And I am connecting also with other people in the regenerative space. There's at this moment a lot of networks And I think weaving those people and organizations and networks together is another important task, which is also part of the regenerative movement in the global level. I write a lot about this weaving and how we do that. And at the same time, I also see it as a balancing act, because you can get lost in the global. You can get lost in just imagining this beautiful utopia and spending your time having very wonderful conversations, but also staying grounded, you know, having your feet on the ground. And from that perspective, I take it one project at a time. Yeah. And we really see where it goes organically, because I don't want to fall into the trap of, you know, having these multi-year plans and starting this strategy and not seeing what's in front of me, right?
Yeah, and I think I can see that more and more from people today, because as you said, it's great to have a vision. I think that's needed. But I see more and more people thinking, okay, what can I do concretely at my level? And also actually seeing the impact of it. And that's also not that easy.
No, I think I would agree with that. I think for the Golden Leaf, I think we're just inspiring, and we want to inspire conversations. And also, you want to lead by an example, right? Because people don't listen to what they say, or they do. But if what you say isn't matched by actions, and whether their actions have been successful or failed, doesn't almost matter. It's, have you done something? And if you've done something, well, you know, why can't I do something? So it's all about inspiring action and kind of empowering people to take action, because I think a lot of people are so overwhelmed by the whole climate change and doomsday scenarios, which, don't get me wrong, I am too sometimes. That's, you know, and I think it's important to kind of highlight and talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's a constant roller coaster. But at the same time, I think what Zairah said, it's all about taking care of yourself and coming back to yourself and saying, well, what can I do? Yeah. What's my part to play? What part of puzzle am I? Absolutely. And where do I slot in? How do I bring my gifts to the world? And how do I co-create and kind of transform my experience, my life experience, my education, my passion, my fear? Because that has to be transformed. It can be a very powerful emotion. And how do I co-create a world that I want to be living in, and I want to be leaving to my kids at some point?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so important. I mean, in business, we say, you know, and that could apply to anything in life, like start small, dream big, but start small. Because, you know, every journey starts with small steps, and then one step after another, you start building a bigger picture. And it can happen also that, you know, you do things in your life, and you're at a certain point in your life, and you cannot possibly imagine where it could potentially lead you in 10 years' time or in 5 years' time. But this will be revealed later on, right? So yeah, you've got to start where you are. And as you said, not be paralyzed by the news, but take concrete actions one after another. And I think I loved what you said, Zairah, in the beginning, that, you know, we are going to be 8 billion people, but if the 8 billion people, or a vast majority of them, do something, it's going to have a massive impact. And that's what we all want, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about a culture of
care.
care.
So shall we finish on this? I'm trying to keep the video under an hour to be able to also have it on Instagram if I can. So thank you so much, Zairah and Lenka. You're both so inspirational. I wish you so well with both of your projects. I know I will continue to follow them as it goes. I will have the video on YouTube, and I will put the links to your respective projects. So if people want to learn more about them, they will have the links. So thank you so much, and wishing you a very good day. It looks half cloudy, half sunny in London. I don't know what it is in the Netherlands, Zairah.
Same.
Yeah. the weather has become very wild. So let's continue to regreen our cities and let's follow your projects moving forward. And perhaps, who knows, we'll do another video together next year to have a look at the next steps of your project. We'll discuss
Absolutely.
that. Thank
so
you.
much.
Have a good day.
Thank you
Bye.
for hosting this, please.